Do you pronounce your name John?
John. Yeah, my full name is Jonathan. About at the age of 14, I started taking on John because it was a little shorter and easier to tell people.
Um, we talked a couple of weeks ago, actually, and I think I saw your video first, and it was one of those um, demo videos that you see everywhere. But then, if you look closer, then you see it's not actually a demo; it's a running deployed system. So I think that was what sparked my curiosity. Before we go deeper into that, maybe you give us a short intro for those who don't know you, and then we continue the natural rhythm of this podcast.
Sounds good. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I'm Jon Miller Schwartz. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Ultra. And at Ultra, we're building industrial AI robots that are actually deployed today and being used by customers to do real work in the real world. So maybe that makes us a little bit of a unique modern robotics company. I don't think it should. I think more people should bias towards deploying robots quickly, but that has been our strategy. And the company's been around for a year and a half, and we have three robots that are live today with customers being used in e-commerce warehouses. But I can go into more of that later.
Thanks. And yeah, it's right to mention that this is nothing against the hype, and there's no hate here. Everyone who is into robotics knows that you do need to have some demos to show the capabilities. But it's good that you're also focusing on the deployed system because in the very end, this is what counts. And just the other day, I saw someone counting the shipped humanoid robots in the US, and it was the comparison between Figure and K-Scale Labs. And I think K-Scale Lab had like three, so that makes them technically, I don't know if that's true. It was just a tweet. The company with the most shipped humanoids in the US. That's funny. Um, Maybe you can go a little bit back in time and tell us a little bit more about earlier days of you, because as we talked earlier before the podcast, I'm always interested in what makes a person become a founder, what makes a person resilient and pursuing these kind of goals.
Sure. Well, I never totally knew that I wanted to start a company. I was always somewhat independent and I think a little bit entrepreneurial minded. But from the time that I was a young kid growing up here in New York City, I was always interested and fascinated with, you know, the built world and, electronics and computers. My father was a trained engineer turned doctor, but he actually went to MIT. And so growing up, I always, had this goal of going to MIT and studying engineering like he did. And, I somehow at one point convinced my mother to buy me a workbench. And I had a workbench in my small bedroom. And I would take apart computers and other electronics that I can get my hands on and try to like understand how these things were built. Um, all of that, kind of manifested itself in me going to a high school where I actually was able to study, a bit more on the math and science and engineering side. And I had this really lucky opportunity here in New York. And that's where I first encountered, the ability or the opportunity to build robots. And so I think, like many people who maybe listen to this podcast, I was on my high school's first robotics team, which is the large, organization started by Dean Kamen, where high schoolers all over the world now build and compete in robotics competitions. And so, that was, I think, where I first cut my teeth on like trying to understand like how do you build a robot and what does it mean for a robot to operate and how do you control it and how do you machine some of the components. But my team was small and dinky. We were just based in this building in New York without much space or machine shop access compared to some teams that are elsewhere and have just like a huge amount of resources to do this. And then I ended up going not to MIT, but I went to Harvey Mudd, which is a small engineering school in Southern California. And again, this is was an environment where I was, getting to learn a lot of the fundamentals. But I also joined at Harvey Mudd. There was an underwater robotics team, and so very different than building robots meant for land. When you build robots that go underwater, everything is more challenging, and every connection needs to be, perfectly watertight, or else your robot will, essentially be destroyed or maybe light on fire, something that happened to us. Um, so anyway, that was another experience I had just thinking about and building robots. And so before I graduated from college, I ended up with a classmate of mine coming up with an idea for a software company in 2012. And this was right during the kind of boom of the 3D printing industry. And we had been using 3D printers at school, and honestly, for 8 years I had been using 3D printers because I'd been studying engineering, and at the time, 3D printers were just becoming accessible. The desktop 3D printing revolution, and companies like MakerBot were bringing the price way down. But they were still very hard to use in terms of the software and creating the things that you'd want to print unless you were a trained engineer. And so we ended up starting a software company in 2012 that we sold to MakerBot a couple of years later. And so I kind of fell into my first startup. It wasn't totally thought through, but we had this idea, and we decided that we'd rather be working on that than going off and getting a job working for someone else. So that's the very abbreviated, how I got to entrepreneurship.
This is a good. I think this is a good cliffhanger because I would like to go back to this in a second. I'm always interested in how much environment plays a role in growing up. You were saying that your father is a trained engineer, and I'm always fascinated by. I mean, in the way I see it, the way I imagine it is that something that your father brought those kind of conversations home, or as you said, you had this little workbench. Do you have a picture of that? I can incorporate it when I do a little bit of a promo for this podcast. But so this kind of conversation were natural because he was showing a bit, you were asking a bit, and so there's a kind of a conversation ongoing for a few years that this is something that sparked yeah your journey. Is that something that you would definitely say this is this is true?
Yeah, I would definitely say that is true. And I have two little girls right now, and so I think about this a lot. How do I enable them to not only pursue uh to pursue what they're interested in, right? I can't guarantee that they're going to be engineers, but I certainly want to give them the opportunity to explore it. And I think it's a combination of uh, bringing it into the home and helping them understand what it is and ask questions and see me as someone who's doing it. But also, I think you need to give kids the opportunity to explore things on their own. And so, talking about that workbench, it was space for me to pursue my own projects, outside of my father's purview, so to say. And I think that's important because you build your own ideas and your own interests, and you can't incept these things in your kids' minds, right? They need to kind of discover it on their own.
I think just recently I saw something, and yeah, you can't engineer your kids. You can just be a shepherd. You can just try to ensure that everything is okay. And as you said, and enabling is through providing, right? So here's something. Do whatever you like. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't need to use it. But um, you said something about the foundation and math and physics, because when you get into engineering, there will be a time, yeah, there will be a point in time where you do need to um, work with these, right? These are also tools. Is that something that came easy to you?
Math and physics were certainly my strong suits in school, more than history and literature. Um, So, I luckily had that foundation. It was always what drove me and what interested me. And, part of my school trajectory was actually moving to a school where I think that was fostered more. So I kind of leaned into it as I got older. And yeah, I mean, I think that somewhat needs to be the case if you want to go into, engineering or any technical field. But I think there are lots of ways you can get there.
One of the guests I had in one of the last episodes, he was talking about being one of the only ones being on the computer all the time, like playing games, but also then starting programming little programs. Um, Being in New York, I mean, take me to that kind of journey or time, to this point of time. Um, were you something who was able to play with these kind of things? Friends, neighbors. You were mentioning the team later on in high school, but in the earlier days, was there something that was very common, or did you spend your times with people that were also interested in the same kind of thing, or were you some sort of not outsider, but someone who had unique interests?
Yeah, I mean, New York is a challenging place, in the way that one of my good friends grew up in Northern California, and his father worked on cars his entire childhood. And, they have a garage, and in the garage, they have all the tools you need to work on cars. And he grew up with that. And I was always a little jealous because, it's hard to work on cars in New York City. There's not space for that, let alone even the space to maybe have like a real like workbench or a workshop. So, in New York, you're definitely a bit constrained by, real estate and space and the ability to do some of these things that might be a little loud or, messy. But for me, I mean, again, like I think it really came down to having my father as this role model figure, who would tell me about his experiences and the things he found interesting, and um, helping me understand some of those things as well as a kid and growing a fascination for it. I think the other thing that happened, just thinking about this a little bit more, I graduated from high school in 2009, and uh, I kind of perfectly overlapped, I think, with this phase where, TED Talks were popular, and, like online media was just starting to get like really good, right? And so I totally bought into that, and I was fascinated by, all of these stories I found online of people building, these amazing things. And I remember actually in ninth grade, I had an engineering class in high school, and the teacher, he had come from California. I forget exactly which company he worked for here. And the first day of the class, he showed us this. It was a little documentary segment that I think was on some news network, and it was about IDEO. I don't know if you know the kind of famous design firm IDEO.
Mhm.
I think in Southern California, and it was about their projects to build a better shopping cart. I think it was, or some smart shopping cart product. Funny thing is that never really took on, but walked through the entire design process and understanding, the user's perspective, and how you go and like iterate on the prototype and test it in the real world. And I remember watching that and just thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to think about, people and the way that they use and interact with the world around them. And then I want to go build it and engineer it and bring it out into the world and make, people's lives better. And so for me, that was also a real inflection point where I kind of got a taste for, oh, this is what it means to build products or to engineer things. It's about, the interaction that everyone has with this. So that was a pretty important moment.
What I was thinking earlier on when you were talking about your father being an engineer, and then later on you were talking about the first entrepreneurial steps that you took and founding this company. My thought was, where is this part coming from, right? Because it is different. There is a different. You were just mentioning so many important points within two sentences, like pain points, customer, talking to them, iterating. So it seems so obvious for everyone who's in the game, and first, second founder. But when you start this kind of adventure, and you coming from an engineering background, these are not those points that come natural to you. So this is the reason why I'm so interested in who got you into this kind of thing, and this brings us maybe back to the point earlier to the to the cliffhanger where you said this was the point where you guys started your own company and solving problems. How did this all come together?
I think for me, maybe it came from a place of, slight rebellion against what it would have been like to go and, get a job and work for someone else and
Mm,
move on, timelines that weren't particularly exciting. I think for a lot of engineers, particularly at the time, I think entrepreneurship is much more common and accepted now than it was when I graduated from college, just 10 years ago. Uh, the classic path for an engineer was, either you go work for, a big tech company like Facebook or Google, or you go and get your, graduate degree, your master's, your PhD degree. And I think I wanted something that was a bit more exciting and like I said, like faster to results and, seeing like, is this going to have the impact I want it to or not? And being in control of my time. I think I've always been a little bit of a generalist, and so I've never liked the idea of just doing, one thing. Um, so how do you get around that? If you have an idea, and I wasn't necessarily looking for one, but my co-founder and I, we just kind of stumbled on this idea and then realized, hey, we could go and do what we were going to do. We had internships lined up at, some companies for that summer, or instead we can go and work on this thing and see what it turns into. And that just felt much more naturally exciting to us.
Um, for me, when my guests talking about these kind of inflection points or these important moments, um, one of the questions that always comes to my mind, like the risk. Is there risk and failure? I talk to a lot of people from the US, but also a lot of European people. And this might be one of the patterns of people being in that podcast and not understanding or not accepting risk. Uh, so how is it for you then deciding, you know what, I don't want to do that. I want to do this I'm much more excited about. How is that safety net, security? How is that for you? Not taking this part and taking that part.
I think, beyond some kind of minimum uh, foundation that, one needs in their life, right? Being able to pay their rent and pay for food. And if you have a family, being able to support that family. Beyond that, and that's obviously, I think the priority, I think there's very little risk to, you know, trying to start a company and seeing where it goes. I don't know if I've really ever spoken with someone who regrets it, even if, you only do it for 6 months and then it doesn't end up working out. I think that it is an opportunity to learn and explore your own abilities at a rate so much faster than where you can do that elsewhere. So I really don't think about starting a company as a risky endeavor. I think the risk is almost more just the opportunity cost, especially, depending on, who you are and the types of opportunities that you might have in front of you, like going and working at, a big company and making, I'd say like a sturdy, salary, right? Like, sure, maybe you'll actually end up making a little less than you would have made otherwise if your company doesn't end up working out. But I think from a kind of learning perspective, and obviously, the upside if things do work out for you is so much greater. Um, yeah, I think I wouldn't really communicate this as a large risk to people who are thinking about it.
Um, Before we start the podcast, one of your questions was, what kind of audience do I have? Who is listening, right? And it is more than obvious then, even if there is a lot of people listening to this podcast who are interested in tech, are not necessarily interested in founding a company, right? So the amount of people listening and then the amount of people who listen to the podcast who would like to build their own company is obviously not as big. And for me, just a second, mm, the when I talk to other people, so who's listened to the podcast, could it grow faster? What are the topics? And I said, you know what, for me, it sounds so cliche, but I think I might lack a little bit of ambitious people around me, or they had different topics in their life. So role models was one of the words that you used earlier on, and so I think this is one of the reasons why I have this podcast, to provide people like you talking about these kind of things and making those risks, those walls, not as high. at least
Mm,
like in the way you perceive them?
yeah, that's a really good point. You brought up, well, there's the role model, but then there's the people you surround yourself with on a day-to-day basis. And you mentioning that makes me also think back to, I think I've been lucky because at various points throughout my life, I've just happened to, you know, make good friends with a few people who became, um, who were I was almost competitive with. In high school, I had a good friend, and we just ended up both being good friends and enjoying, spending time with each other. But there was definitely an element of competition there. And, he was very smart and hardworking. And, in a way, we kind of pushed each other, further and faster than I maybe would have, pushed myself on my own, let's say. And then the same thing happened in college. My roommate, who I still am very good friends with, this day, I had a similar type of dynamic with. And so all of that's to say the people you surround yourself with, in a way, you kind of they rub off on you, you rub off on them. And so it's really not that you need to go into it super consciously, but you need to realize that, putting yourself in scenarios where you get to be with people who you admire and who maybe push you in ways that at times can even be uncomfortable, like that compounds, or, every single day, every month. And so, it's something worth doing.
I mean, I still can put my finger on it because I think one of the last guests mentioned it must be in their genes. So, um, because all the upsides and all the positive aspects that you were just laying out very clearly and very easy to follow and understand is still the majority of people prefer not to do this. And um, so when I look back and when I see the people who are not on my journey anymore, none of them is interested in these kind of things. And I wonder what is it that um, what is it that brings this kind of fire, right? Because it's as you said, it's always a new opportunity, but it's also always a new challenge, right? So I had so many different kind of jobs, and it's always it's your first day. You don't know anything, you don't know anybody, and this is not necessarily the greatest feeling in the world, right? So why put yourself in this kind of situation over and over again? As you said, it gets easier over time, and you learn more, but why is it? Why is it? I don't know.
So if I were to maybe paraphrase what you're asking, what motivates us, right? Or how do you find the motivation to put yourself in scenarios that might not be immediately comfortable or easy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think different people have different motivations. I think it almost matters less than what your specific motivation is and more just that you found something, right? It could be money, it could be learning, it could be fame, it could be, power, whatever it is. But you want to be motivated to do something.
And was that something that came easy to you, or do you needed to motivate yourself?
I've always been motivated by, I don't know, I mean, impact. I think, wanting to make something of my life and not waste the time that I have. I get very, when I'm not doing something, when I'm not productive, yeah, I get stressed. Actually, it's the opposite, I think, for a lot of people. But when I feel like I'm not, forwarding myself or my, goals in some way, that makes me uncomfortable. So yeah, I think for me, it's been impact and, wanting to put out good work into the world that does something for people.
When I talk to friends of mine, and they're also on social media, and I'm talking to founders, and I'm in the startup game, so I talk to a lot of people, pre-seed, seed, Series A people, and the question always comes up: what's your motivation? This is the reason why I'm asking, right? So to better understand what's in it, and it is interesting when you talk to people from software side and hardware side, and now maybe this can function as a bridge for you. Um, hardware is hard. It gets a little bit sexy now, or back to becoming more interesting for all kinds of people, not only on social media, but like for builders, for investors, and the uh, the motivation of having impact, it seems different than I would like to build the next SaaS model, the next ChatGPT wrapper, the next productivity tool. What you guys are doing is something that is happening in the real world, right? So maybe you can tell us now a bit more about how what you guys are doing today, how this came together, and yeah, what you guys are doing and who you are, like as a company, but also like the team.
Sure. And to your point, I don't think there are a lot of people who start hardware companies because they think it's the easy path. You've got to have a special, uh, you know, uh, you've got to like the pain, right, and the difficulty. But actually working on something that is physical and that can see and use in the real world, I think that's a baseline requirement. So in terms of Ultra and how we got here, I mentioned that we had started one company. We sold that to MakerBot. Then my co-founders and I, we started a second company together. And this time we actually built a factory here in the United States where we were manufacturing high volume plastic parts. So the same types of items that you would use injection molding for overseas, we were making here in the US, in quantities of 10 to 30,000 units per run. And part of building that factory, that capacity, was using both robotic and software automation to just make the process as kind of scalable and as low cost as possible, so we could actually hit those economics that made it make sense. And so we built a number of kind of automation systems in that factory using 6 degree of freedom robotic arms. And this was in 2017, so it was kind of what you consider like last generation robotics. And yeah, I mean, it was really tough, even for us as trained engineers. It was tough to build the system and to get it to work with the kind of reliability that we needed it to. And then even once it was working, it would constantly go out of calibration or have issues. And there's a story we tell how as the seasons would change, the temperature would change and the building would warp, and the system would stop working and we'd have to recalibrate. And so that was the experience we had. And fast forward to today, as we were paying attention to what was happening kind of in research over the past couple of years, seeing obviously the arrival of neural nets for robotic control, but then also just this I'd say like Cambrian explosion of robotic hardware, right? Like what it would have taken to build a high performance robot 5 years ago can now be done much faster and for much less money. And so to us, it was clear that the kind of ground beneath our feet was shifting, and it was now possible to conceptualize, let alone like actually build the robots that we wish we had at our previous company. Right. For anyone who's been working and dreaming about robots, it's clear that we're heading in this direction where robots can do different tasks more easily, that they don't require teams of engineers to install every time you want to go and deploy one. Um, and obviously there's this far off dream of humanoids in the home or out about in the world doing things, but there's still this like, how do we make robots actually useful and scalable, right? And I think that's been the challenge for decades now, and that's why the kind of industry is littered with dead robotics companies. So at Ultra, we're trying to take advantage of these recent breakthroughs in intelligence, in the kind of quickly commodifying hardware landscape. And we're building robots that can be scalably deployed to do flexible work today in industrial environments. And our first use case is e-commerce order packing. So this is where our robots are literally taking goods that consumers order online, putting those goods into packages with labels on them, and that's what gets shipped back to you after you place an order, let's say. It's something that 100,000 people do in the United States today. Within 3PL warehouses. And the task, it's kind of got the right makings for a task that can be automated with neural nets today. Order packing, pretty much looks consistent across the industry. Every pack station looks like every other pack station. But the types of movements and manipulations that are required to actually go and, pack a bag or pack a box, they're incredibly dexterous and variable. You might be grabbing, one of tens of thousands of items that your warehouse stores, and you're interacting with, floppy materials like a bag or a cardboard box. And so these are you know, the manipulations that traditional robotics would have a very hard time automating, but new neural net-based control can do. So that's what we're focused on Ultra. We've been doing it for a year and a half, and like I said earlier, we have 3 robots that are deployed today, doing this day in day out for customers.
When I talk to founders in that space, and as you said right now with the new technology, especially the AI part, hardware is still challenging. But now with the software, you have new capabilities. But with those capabilities also comes an endless stream of opportunities you would like to take on, and especially when you're early on in the company, trying to find product market fit might be not the right word, but what are the use cases you're focusing on? When you now have capabilities, or when now through AI the capabilities are not the limiting factor anymore. Now comes volume or strategic partners you're looking for, right? When you're an early company, a lot of these companies are struggling with making a decision in terms of should we go for machine tending? Should we go for a logistic use case like pick and place, or should we go for some like assembly case, whatever is right? The You would like to be as open as possible, so your mouth is open and you can just grab whatever comes towards you, and yeah, you're seeking those kind of opportunities. How is it that you decided for the use case that we all saw online? And then so yeah, maybe you answer this first then.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I think there are too many people talking about general purpose robots today, because before you have a robot that can be general, it better do one thing well enough for customers to want to use it. Because if it can't do that, I don't care how many demo videos you have of your robot being used for different things. And, you know, again, to this point, part of, doing a job for a customer and them using it and getting value from it is not doing it, 10 times in a row in a lab setting, but it's actually getting the system to a point where it can be used every single day for, eventually like years on end, right? So that's been our approach is let's aim, we're making multi-purpose robots before we're making general purpose robots. And so we're only aiming, for a few specific tasks, but we're really making sure that we can do them at a high level of performance today. And until we hit that, we're not going to expand to anything new. So how did we choose, the logistics space and e-commerce order packing? I think, as a robotics company, you want something where, you can sell in, you can have an impact for this use case. And ideally, it's a large and growing market. You don't need to aim for the biggest market in the world. I think that's it's a false assumption that sometimes founders make is I need to go after the, multi-trillion-dollar market because that's like the most exciting thing. But actually what you probably care about more is finding, a set of customers and users who, are really going to get a lot of value out of your solution. So for us, warehousing and logistics, it's an industry that is large. It's growing. E-commerce in the United States is growing at 7 to 8% annually. And there's still a lot of room for it to grow into retail as a whole. It's an industry that's familiar with automation. There obviously are many companies trying to sell all sorts of types of from industrial to robotic automation to these customers. So there's precedent for adoption of this type of technology, which is to say it's ripe. But this is a use case where, again, I think the challenge of this task matches very well for this new capability that we have, neural net control. And I think there are a lot of people and companies today who are working backwards from the technology oh, this is really cool. I want to have a robot that can, use a neural net to do something useful. But, then you kind of have the roboticist dilemma where you've got a hammer and you're looking for nails that this works well for. And so I think you need to also come from the other end and look for, labor pools that are not automated and for good reason, right? Because it maybe is challenging in the ways that automation has not worked, but now is enabling. And so that's how we ended up at Order Packaging. We also have a little experience as a team working in this industry, and so we kind of knew that it was a viable option, and we spent the first few months looking into it before we committed.
I think you said something multi-purpose versus general purpose, and you said maybe doing one job very well before you move on to the next one, next task. I think this is, it seems so obvious and so simple, but still, and I talk to founders on a daily basis, right? For the podcast and for social media in general. So I might have the opportunity to talk to more founders than other people. And here over and over again I see they are so excited with the technology. A lot of these people have PhDs, had been in the lab for ages, and really exciting and know their things, right? But the problem aspect that you were mentioning earlier on, like working backwards from the problem and deciding for one problem that you might, and it was obviously the case, have a little bit of experience on, right? So you do know the inside and outs of this kind of problem, makes things so much easier. And it's not limiting yourself, it's enabling yourself, because you do need to earn the opportunity to do the next steps versus if you can do all the things, then you can do nothing, right? So
Yeah,
and this is a trap that you finding yourself very easily in.
100%. And I understand, as a robotics nerd, wanting to push the frontier forward and wanting to be a part of this very exciting moment that we're in. I just think you need to be careful, and ideally leave yourself open to the range of solutions that you might determine are actually the right solutions for the problem you're trying to solve.
I mean, the packaging part, even though when you're talking about this and you're mentioning the number, it seems, yeah, it is a big market. It's growing, and it's something that you're not getting away very easily in the near future, even though those packaging sorting videos from Figure seems interesting. Um, but you do need to admit it's not sexy. It's boring, right? So, in that exciting AI hype world, robotics, where you see robots doing backflips and dancing and fighting, and you see some of the other companies with they raised a lot of money, three figures, three-digit millions, and then you see what they are capable of. Packaging doesn't seem something that is and here, pardon me, right? No offense, seems so sexy. But
Yep.
being in manufacturing for a while, you were mentioning the maturity of automation. So people are familiar with automation, which is good because then expectation management is not such a huge part of the sales process because you're talking to people who have an understanding. And but the making the decision, I'm focusing on this, something that might not look as sexy as one of the other, some of the other videos, which are just videos, right? Was that something that felt natural to you because you were focusing so much on the problem, or were you aware of, there's other things we could do, or should we look into other things? How to not get distracted? How do we're able to focus?
I think it can be very challenging if you're starting with a blank slate as a founder. It can be really tough to decide which direction to push in, right? Especially these days when there's just all these exciting, breakthroughs and technologies. And so at the end of the day, I think you sometimes need to just decide, hey, we're going to go wander down this path for a little bit, and we're going to try to go as deep as we can. And we're going to talk to as many customers or end users as possible. And we're going to see if we can build conviction. And I think ultimately, even if, Packaging, yeah, not sexy at all. I never, thought I'd be focusing this much time thinking about like how you pack orders for warehouses. But the further you wander down some of these paths, the more, you kind of start to see all of the interesting little details and, problems and things that you can actually go and now address with technology. And I think that's where it starts to flip and you start to get excited, right? And if you're lucky, you've stumbled on an area where there's all these little opportunities. And when you start to get excited, that's when you can feel like, you know what, I think there's something here. I think this hasn't been addressed like it should have been, or maybe, again, like, there's recently been some sort of inflection and that's why it hasn't been addressed like this. And I think, what we're doing is one of these examples where, um, you know, packaging isn't new. People have been doing this in warehouses for many, many years now. There are some solutions, but mainly industrial automation solutions that are large and expensive and relatively inaccessible to most warehouses in the world. And now we have this opportunity to build, much more flexible, lightweight, easy to install, easy to scale robots that can actually go and bring this like really, breakthrough technology to a level where warehouses can actually start to adopt it and get value from it. So I think, we feel like we've found a really good use for it. And at this point, our goal is to just like scale this as fast as we can. Because, if you think about what's going to make for, successful large robotics companies, it's going to be having robots in the field, generating data, creating value for customers that you can continue to leverage and, produce more robots through.
Are you already at a stage where you looking not what's in front of you 2 or 3 months, but you're already looking for something that is within 6 months, 8 months, 12 months? So the multi-purpose robot. So now you're focusing on this one to solve this entirely to the satisfaction and reliability and flexibility, but also the repeatability, all those numbers, all those KPIs that are very important for that. So do you feel you already have some sort of confidence and level where you reach that, where you can look one step ahead and see what would be the next use case we are looking for?
Yeah, we're definitely thinking through our kind of, I'd say like 1 to 2 year timeline. It gets fuzzier, of course, the further out you go, but you still need to know the general direction you're heading. Beyond order packing, we're going to be expanding to other types of repetitive tasks that happen in the same warehouses where we're operating today. So if you go walk into any of these, facilities, you'll see people who are sorting packages, like literally picking them up off conveyor belts, looking at the labels, and based on the shipping carrier, are sorting it into, one of 5, 6, 7 different positions. It's a task that's really not meant for people to do. It's hard to do at high speeds because you've got to be reading the labels and manipulating the packages. But it's a great use case for robots. Order kitting is another good use case where, again, like, oftentimes product companies will have manufacturers overseas send a bunch of inventory to a single warehouse, and it's actually in that warehouse where people, pull different SKUs together and put them into new packaging. So if you order, a seltzer, variety pack online with, one of 4 flavors, it was probably in a US warehouse where those different SKUs were combined into that variety pack, product SKU. And so that's called order kitting, which is again, highly manual, requires a lot of kind of human level dexterity to be able to go and handle these objects. So I think like, that's another really good use case for these modern robots. So those are just a couple. There are a few more as well that we're looking at. But again, we're trying to expand in a way that makes sense, essentially where we want to earn the right from our customers. So, how do we get these new use cases pulled out of us versus us trying to like push them, with any, degree of resistance?
Thanks for giving us some insights here. You were saying dexterity now, I think the second time. Is it something that, because it is totally a topic on its own, right? And I will have a guest, one of the next few episodes, talking only about that. But maybe you can give us a little glimpse in how you think, how this topic is important for you at this stage where you guys are at.
Yeah, I mean, force dependent dexterity, which is to say, the handling and interaction with the world where the amount of force you to apply is important. that is certainly the frontier of robotic automation, um, manipulation as the field, right? What I'll say is we've found that you can do a lot with, bimanual manipulation, even without, 22-degree freedom hands or, touch sensors that allow, the robot to feel everything. You can still do a lot with the right strategy. And so it's when you look at a lot of what these research labs, like Aloha type setups with two arms, with people, packing orders or cutting things with knives. um, I think that as humans we are very good at adapting the way we approach manipulation tasks if you're given constraints. So even with two finger grippers, and the right strategy, I think you can do a lot of these manipulation tasks. Nonetheless, I think getting really good force feedback to, if you're using a teleoperators to do it at first to collect the data, or even for your robot, that might be the key enabler in terms of, speeding things up, improving the accuracy or the reliability of your robot doing that task. So I think this is very much like the bleeding edge in robotics right now. This is what a lot of like academic research labs are focused on, and very well funded, robot foundation model companies are focused on. I think our goal at Ultra is to benefit from these breakthroughs as they happen by being the company that has, the most deployed robots in the world that can quickly like take advantage of whatever new methods there are for data collection or sensors that we can retrofit on our fleet. Um, so all that's to say, I don't think for us it's going to be a limiter in the near term in terms of the value we can provide our customers. But as it happens, I think we stand to hugely benefit from being able to operate with more dexterity, more force feedback, and so on.
Um, you were talking about well-funded companies. Where are you guys? Are you able to share a few numbers here? Like how big is the team, and are you guys raising, not raising? Maybe you give us an insight if you like to share a bit.
Sure. Yeah. So the team is 9 people today. We are an in-person company, which maybe is somewhat rare for all companies, but not for robotics companies. We're based here in Brooklyn, New York, and yeah, all engineers on the team right now, and it'll probably stay like that for a while. We have raised some money. We'll probably be making an announcement soon, so I'll leave that for now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it is interesting the location because I talked to a few founders in the US. I mean, obviously, when they're very early stage, a lot of these people are in the Bay Area. Talking to someone from Detroit, and I think you're the first one who's like really on the East Coast. I mean, I'm talking to a few people in labs, but not in production. As you said, real estate is a limiting factor. It will be interesting to see what's coming out of and then how the ecosystem will develop in yeah, in and around New York. That is some yeah, it is a bit unique, right? Because the majority of startups in that space are in tech, finance, fintech, and research, obviously, but like physical robotics. Do you have some people to talk to?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a strong, certainly smaller than the Bay Area, but still a strong community of, robotics companies and founders here in New York. One of the things that we like about being in New York is, we're between Boston and Pittsburgh, obviously two, strong robotics hubs, with, MIT in Boston and CMU in Pittsburgh. And then, even in New York, I think there's some really great research labs between Columbia and NYU, which we see as like, good potential, like, feeder schools for, new hires. And then part of our hypothesis as well is, I think there are a lot of people out there who are from New York or the East Coast or want to come live here, but there just haven't been, many great opportunities in robotics. And so I think being a company that's based here, giving people those opportunities if they want to move here, puts us in a bit of a unique position. So I think we have liked being here thus far. The Northeast, specifically, is a bit of a corridor for the logistics industry, and
Mm.
so it's also great from an opportunity to be close to the areas where we're going to be deploying robots. And then, as we grow, eventually I'm sure we'll open up offices elsewhere so that we can, take advantage of other hubs within the US and beyond.
It is an exciting time. It is. I really like the idea of yeah, what you said. This is the first task, this is the first use case, and then expansion within the same factory floor, on the same factory floors or same factories and plants. And as you said, being positioned in a place where, yeah, we're not getting rid of logistics very, very soon, right? And yeah, I'm excited for you guys. I'm looking forward to the announcement, and I'm very thankful that you took some time of your day, of your schedule, and yeah, reserved it for us to get a better understanding what you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on, and it's been fun chatting.
I do think I need to reach out to you to get a better understanding about the ecosystem because I talked to Laurel Pinto. He's from the
Hmm.
NYU, um, but and obviously the universities are very well known. I had a few people, but when it comes to physical robotics companies, seems to be a little bit of a blind spot for me. So I will definitely see if you can do a few interests. Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to see the photo from your workbench.
I'll see if I can dig something up.
That would be nice. Take care and have a good day.
Thank you, earlier. You too.
Bye bye.